All right, we're going to dive into one of the absolute wildest conspiracy theories out there, but we're going to flip it on its head. We're going to see if, hidden deep inside this crazy myth about lizardmen, there's actually a totally new way to look at our history, our power structures, and maybe even reality itself. So yeah, let's get into it.
So, the whole idea of reptilian elites secretly pulling the strings of the world. I mean, it sounds completely nuts, right? But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if, buried way down under all the sci-fi stuff, there's a tiny kernel of a real, forgotten memory? A story not about aliens from some distant star, but about survivors from a world before our own.
Okay, so let's start by totally reframing who we're even talking about. Forget looking up at the stars for where they came from. Instead, we're going to look down, right here, into Earth's own incredibly deep, hidden past.
Now, the source material we're digging into suggests a really simple but kind of world-changing name switch. Forget Lizardmen, think Dinosaurmen. Just that one little change flips the entire story. Suddenly, they're not alien invaders. They're from right here. They're terrestrial survivors, the last remnants of a civilization that rose and fell on Earth long, long before us.
So the whole hypothesis is actually pretty straightforward. These beings didn't land in spaceships. They came out of hiding, right here on our planet. They were survivors from a time so ancient it's completely faded into myth, only showing up again after some massive cataclysm basically wiped the whole slate clean.
And this is just a perfect example of how a simple, literal observation can get twisted into a myth over time. I mean, put yourself in their shoes. You're a primitive human, you've just barely survived a global flood, and then you see these advanced beings walking out of some massive structure that's half submerged in water. You wouldn't think, oh look, a high-tech survival bunker. No way. You'd say they came from the sea.
Now here's where it gets really fascinating. This whole idea of advanced survivors showing up after a catastrophe, well, it isn't just a one-off idea. It's a pattern you see in the oldest, most foundational myths from all over the planet. I mean, the consistency here is just staggering. You've got totally separate cultures, separated by vast oceans and thousands of years, all telling a remarkably similar story. It's always the same: first a world-ending flood, then wise beings come out of the water and give humanity the building blocks of civilization all over again. You see this four-step pattern pop up again and again and again. It's almost like a narrative blueprint for our most ancient stories. You've got a golden age, then a total catastrophe, then the arrival of these godlike saviors, and finally, the rebirth of society. The fact that it repeats so often makes you wonder, maybe it's not just a story. Maybe it's a shared, broken memory of something that actually happened.
Okay, so let's say this really happened, an encounter between these advanced survivors and primitive humans. How on Earth could an event that ancient still be affecting us today? Well, this next part explores that exact question.
It's one of those simple truths, right? Knowledge is power. And these survivors, these Dinosaurmen, they had knowledge that the scattered, traumatized tribes of humans had totally lost. We're talking about architecture, astronomy, agriculture, you name it. This incredible knowledge gap didn't just make them leaders, it gave them almost absolute, godlike control.
And you have to remember, to a primitive mind, technology that's advanced enough would look exactly like magic. The ability to predict the seasons or build enormous stone structures, that would seem supernatural. Their authority wasn't seen as something political, it was seen as a gift from the heavens. It was divine.
This is the crucial step. That perception of them being divine gets written down, codified into religion and myth. The stories of gods coming from the sea weren't just bedtime stories. They were political documents. They created a system of control where the legitimacy of the rulers was handed down from the gods themselves, which made it pretty much impossible to question.
So the argument here is that this ancient encounter created a blueprint for top-down, hierarchical control that has basically just updated its software over the millennia. The methods change, sure. You go from claims of divine blood to the divine right of kings, all the way to modern control of money and information. But that underlying structure, a knowledgeable few ruling over the many, it's still with us.
And this is where we take a huge pivot. We're going to shift gears from ancient history and power structures and dive into some really deep philosophy. Because if the gods of the ancient world were just powerful survivors, what does that do to the whole concept of God itself? This is a really profound question when you think about it, and the source material suggests that instead of just dismissing this almost universal human belief, maybe we should look for what it's reflecting. not in old books, but in the actual physical structure of the universe around us.
So let's break this down. The old idea, which was born out of those ancient power structures, paints God as a king on a throne, separate from us, ruling over us. But this new idea suggests something totally different. What if God isn't the king, but God is the kingdom? The underlying interconnected web that is everything.
And the really wild part is that when we look through our most powerful telescopes and microscopes, science keeps finding the same web-like pattern, everywhere, at every single scale. The way galaxies are distributed across the cosmos looks shockingly similar to the fungal networks that connect an entire forest, which in turn looks just like the neural pathways inside our own brains. It seems to be a kind of universal signature.
So in this model, we're not separate from God at all. We're an expression of it. Think about a huge underground mycelial network. The mushroom you see on the forest floor is just a temporary little fruit. In the same way, maybe we are just temporary nodes through which this universal network gets to experience itself.
This completely reframes something like the fall from grace. Maybe it wasn't a punishment. Maybe it was the moment the network evolved self-awareness in its individual parts. It's the universe, in a sense, forgetting that it's the universe so that it can have the joy of remembering who and what it is, through us.
Okay, so this brings us to our final and maybe most important section. If we're all fundamentally connected parts of this one giant cosmic network, then why does our world feel so fractured, so competitive, and so deeply disconnected?
The source material proposes that a lot of indigenous cultures never fully lost this awareness of being part of the network. Their entire worldview is often based on cooperation with a living system. Modern civilization, on the other hand, was pretty much built on the idea of separation, of conquering nature, and of celebrating the individual above all else. Our goal so often is to win, not necessarily to understand.
And this really gets to the core of our modern problems, doesn't it? Our whole social and economic system is built on this illusion that we're all separate. It encourages us to act as competing individuals, and it teaches us to prioritize being right over the much harder work of collaborating as parts of a greater whole.
And this brings us to a really beautiful, powerful idea to wrap up with. The path forward isn't about throwing away technology or going back to the Stone Age. It's about consciously reintegrating our modern individual minds back into the wisdom of the network. It's about using all our incredible knowledge to finally harmonize with the system, instead of trying to dominate it.
So we end right back where we started, with a choice of how we see things, from a wild myth about ancient rulers to the scientific reality of a cosmic web. The fundamental question is still the same. Are we here to rule over a world we've disconnected from, or are we here to be conscious parts of a connected universe? At the end of the day, that choice is up to us. Thanks for tuning in.